Welcome back to our channel, where the most dramatic, inspiring, and unforgettable stories come to life. Today, we bring you a story that will keep you hooked from the very first moment until the very last. It's about a humble waitress who was laughed at, mocked, and underestimated by everyone around her. But fate had a twist prepared. Her simple business plan caught the attention of a powerful CEO. What started as humiliation soon turned into a journey of respect, ambition, and even unexpected romance. This story will take you through 8 chapters filled with raw emotions: humiliation, hope, courage, and ultimately love and success. If you're looking for a story that feels both real and deeply moving, this is the one for you. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next incredible story we share. Let's dive right into. They laughed at the waitress, but the CEO fell in love with her business plan. The small diner on the corner was never a place of elegance. Its pale yellow walls were peeling, the neon sign flickered like it was gasping for breath, and the greasy smell of fried food hung in the air like part of its soul. Yet every morning, it was packed. Rushed workers, late office clerks, and of course, picky customers who just loved to vent on someone. Among all the worn-out faces, one young woman stood out. Not because of fancy clothes or striking beauty, but because of her bright eyes, always shining with resilience. Her name was Emily, a waitress who knew every scratched wooden table, every regular customer, and every biting remark. "Hey, Emily, don't spill coffee on me again today," a pot-bellied regular shouted with a raspy laugh as she walked by with her tray. His friends roared with laughter, as if it were the funniest joke of the century. Emily forced a polite smile and nodded. Deep down, she wanted to dump the hot coffee right on his head, but instead, she kept walking, more careful than ever. Emily was used to mockery. People laughed because she was just a waitress. No degree, no future. They looked down on her as if serving food for life was a crime. But behind her patient smile, Emily kept an old notebook full of dreams, her very own business plan, written after countless sleepless nights. That notebook was worn out, with frayed corners, but each page carried numbers, ideas, and daring visions. In her mind, this greasy diner was only the beginning. She dreamed of a chain of restaurants where people not only ate well, but also felt respected, no matter who they were, a place far from this suffocating atmosphere of mockery. But life was never that simple. Every time Emily dared to mention her idea, people burst out laughing like she had told a fairy tale. "A waitress starting a company? Ha! Then tomorrow I'll be the President of the United States," a coworker once sneered. Emily just smiled, but inside, her fire burned even brighter. That day, as if fate was teasing her, a very different customer walked in. He wore a tailored black suit, his polished shoes gleaming under the diner's flickering lights. His presence quieted the noisy room for a moment. No one else but Alexander Grant, a famous CEO in the finance world, his name tied to billion-dollar deals. Emily had no idea who he was. To her, he was just another customer. But those who loved to mock her recognized him right away and seized the chance. "Hey, Emily, better serve him carefully. Who knows, he might hire you as CEO, ha ha ha." Laughter rang out again. Emily bit her lip, kept her smile, and walked toward the stranger's table. But inside, a strange feeling stirred. Something told her that life was about to change. And maybe, just maybe, the plan hidden in her notebook would finally see the light. Emily set the tray down on the table with a polite smile. "Good morning, sir. What would you like today?" Alexander looked up. His eyes were sharp but not cold. There was a calmness about him that made Emily slightly uneasy. He gave a small nod and said, "A black coffee and the breakfast special, please." "Thank you." His voice was deep, steady, and clear. Emily quickly jotted it down and walked away, trying to stay composed. But she could feel the stares from nearby customers. A group of men whispered, "Look at her. She's probably shaking, just waiting to spill that coffee." "Ha! If she messes up, that CEO will throw her right out," their snickers echoed. Emily heard every word, but strangely, she felt calm this time. She pressed her hand against the notebook hidden in her apron pocket. Inside were not only numbers, but her belief that one day she wouldn't have to endure these cheap insults anymore. As she returned with the coffee, disaster struck. A child dashed past and bumped into her arm. The tray wobbled, the steaming cup nearly tipping. A few drops spilled, almost landing on Alexander's sharp black suit. The diner froze. "See? Told you!" the pot-bellied man shouted, bursting into cruel laughter. Others joined in. Emily froze in horror, ready to apologize, but Alexander calmly caught the cup, steadying it on the table without a single drop on himself. He looked up at her with composure. "It's all right, just a little accident. Are you okay?" Emily blinked in surprise. Instead of the anger or scolding she expected, he offered her a reassuring smile. The entire diner fell silent, but the whispers soon started again. "He's just being nice. Soon enough he'll see she's nothing but a clumsy waitress." Emily heard them, but this time she simply smiled faintly, because in Alexander's eyes she sensed something different. He didn't just see a clumsy waitress. His gaze seemed to search deeper, as if he could sense that behind that worn apron there was something much more. And in that very moment, Emily knew her life was about to turn a page. After the near-coffee spill, Emily forced herself to stay calm as she continued serving Alexander's order. When she set the plate down, she noticed his eyes still fixed on her, not in judgment, nor pity, but with a kind of quiet curiosity, as though he was assessing something deeper. Alexander ate slowly, sipping his coffee now and then, his gaze occasionally following Emily as she bustled around the diner. Sweat formed on her brow, but she kept smiling politely at every customer, even the ones who mocked her. The group of men started again. "Look at her, pretending to be cheerful. Poor and still dreaming big. Yeah, maybe she thinks she'll own a restaurant someday." Their laughter rang out, shrill and cutting. Emily heard every word. Her chest tightened, but she didn't react. She knew one outburst would only give them more reason to tear her down. Alexander frowned slightly. He set his coffee cup down and glanced at the men. One stern look was enough to silence them for a moment, though they quickly pretended to busy themselves with their food. As Emily cleared a nearby table, disaster struck again. Her small notebook slipped from her apron pocket, landing right at Alexander's feet. She bent down in a panic, but he picked it up first. Curiosity made him flip through a few pages before she could snatch it back. To his surprise, it wasn't work notes. It was filled with handwritten charts, sketches, and bold business ideas. Emily's face flushed as she stammered, "Sorry, that's just—" "Random notes," Alexander gave a faint smile. "Random? I don't think so. You don't spend sleepless nights writing random things like this." Her heart pounded. Never in her life had she let anyone see her plan, least of all a stranger. She had no idea he was one of the most powerful CEOs in America. The men nearby jumped in again.
"What's that?"
"A waitress writing fairy tales?"
"Yeah, maybe soon we'll see the Emily Empire."
Laughter burst out once more. Emily's cheeks burned with humiliation, but Alexander didn't laugh. He closed the notebook, handed it back gently, and murmured just for her, "This might be worth more than you think." Emily froze. His words were quiet, but to her they rang out like a ray of light piercing through the darkest night. Alexander's brief words left Emily frozen. In that instant, the mocking laughter around her faded, replaced by the echo of something she had never heard before, a recognition. "Worth more than you think." Emily clutched the notebook to her chest, her heart racing. So many nights she had thought herself foolish for believing that a poor waitress could write down anything worthy of attention. So many times she had been laughed at, until even she doubted her own worth. Yet today a stranger, with steady eyes and a firm voice, had planted a seed of belief inside her. The diner's atmosphere grew strange. The hecklers shifted uncomfortably, their laughter suddenly powerless. They glanced at Alexander, whispering, "Does he actually take that notebook seriously? Probably just being polite. Don't get your hopes up." Emily heard them, but this time their words no longer stung. Alexander's sentence still echoed, drowning out their cheap ridicule. He continued his meal while Emily worked, but her steps felt lighter, her movements more graceful, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally lifted. When Alexander stood to leave, he placed a tip on the table, far more generous than usual. But what stunned Emily wasn't the money. It was the small note tucked underneath. "Don't give up. An idea only dies when the one who wrote it stops believing." Emily's hands trembled as she picked it up, eyes glistening. It wasn't just encouragement. It was a torch lighting up her heart. The diner door opened. The bell jingled as Alexander walked out. His figure disappeared into the bustling street, leaving behind a waitress clutching her notebook tightly, with a fire burning brighter than ever. She had no idea that this small moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would astonish the world. The next day, the diner was as busy as ever. But for Emily, everything felt different. She had woken earlier, lingered in front of the mirror longer, and in her eyes was no longer the familiar weariness, but a spark she couldn't hide. She still wore her old apron, still tied her hair neatly, but inside, the fire Alexander lit yesterday was still burning strong. She brought her notebook to the diner again, this time not hiding it so tightly. Whenever the crowd thinned, she would open it, scan the pages filled with charts and words, and whisper to herself, "I have to keep going. I can't stop halfway." But the world was never kind for long. The same group of regulars showed up, their snickers aimed directly at her. "Look, she's got her magic notebook again. Careful, maybe she's planning to take over the whole street." Their laughter filled the room. Emily pressed her lips together, gripping the notebook tightly. But this time she didn't feel shaken. Their voices seemed distant, drowned out by Alexander's words still echoing in her heart. An idea only dies when the one who wrote it stops believing. Then, in the middle of their jeers, the diner bell chimed, and in walked none other than Alexander Grant. The room buzzed. The men who had mocked Emily straightened their backs, whispering nervously. He actually came back. Could there be something special here? No way. A CEO like him has no reason to come back to this dump. Emily froze, her heart racing. She could hardly believe her eyes. Alexander walked to the same table, sat down as if it were his usual spot, and looked up with a smile when Emily approached. "Good morning. Today I'd like to try something different. But first," he paused, his eyes gleaming with interest. Could you show me a few more pages from that notebook?" The room fell silent. Every gaze turned to Emily, and in that moment, she faced a choice. Continue hiding her dream, or finally place it in the light, right in front of those who had always looked down on her. Emily stood frozen, clutching the notebook in her apron. The stares around her cut like knives, waiting for her to be humiliated. The diner fell into a strange hush, broken only by the clatter of cutlery in the far corner. She took a deep breath. In that moment, she remembered every cruel word ever thrown at her. A waitress dreaming of owning a business? "Stop dreaming, you're only fit for an apron." But then, Alexander's words from yesterday pulled her back from the shadows. An idea only dies when the one who wrote it stops believing. Emily lifted her head, determination sparking in her eyes. She pulled out the notebook and set it gently on Alexander's table. "All right, if you really want to see it," the diner buzzed with whispers. The group of men smirked, thinking this would be their new entertainment. But Alexander was different. He turned page after page, his eyes following the dense notes, restaurant sketches, cost projections, and even an expansion plan. He raised his brows, tapping a finger on the table. "You wrote all of this yourself?" Emily nodded, her voice trembling but firm. "Yes, every night after my shift I spend hours writing. I know it sounds silly, but this is my dream." Alexander was silent for a moment, as though weighing every detail. Then he let out a soft chuckle, not mocking but surprised and intrigued. "Silly? No, Emily. This is a business draft most MBA students couldn't even dream of writing." The words struck her like lightning. Never in her life had anyone acknowledged her work like this. The men at the nearby table fell quiet, their smug faces uneasy. Alexander continued, "You have numbers, you have vision, and most importantly, you have a conviction I rarely see in sterile business plans." He looked up at her. "What you're missing is opportunity." Emily swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. Opportunity! The word felt like a door swinging open, one she had never dared to approach. The diner seemed to hold its breath, and in that moment, Emily knew. This conversation would change everything. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. She couldn't believe Alexander, a man clearly from another world, was seriously reading every page of her notebook. Other diners exchanged glances, half surprised, half doubtful. An elderly woman whispered to her companion, "He really is a CEO, and he's interested in a waitress's notebook?" Alexander closed the notebook, resting his hand on the worn cover as if it were an important document. Looking straight at Emily, he asked slowly, "Emily, have you ever thought about making all of this real?" Emily hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have, but I don't have money or a degree and no one believes me." They just laugh. Alexander chuckled softly, not mocking but understanding. Laugh? They laughed at me too. When I first started, people said I was crazy, that someone from my background could never step into finance. But if I had quit back then, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Emily's eyes widened. For the first time, she heard a successful man admit he had once been dismissed, just like her. He continued, his voice calm yet weighty. People laugh because they can't see what you see. They laugh because they're afraid to admit their own dreams died long ago. But if you still believe, you're already ahead of them. The diner fell silent. The men who mocked her before now sat in uneasy quiet. Eyes that once looked down on her shifted into curiosity. Emily felt her nose sting with emotion. How could a stranger speak the very words she had longed to hear? Her voice trembled as she asked, Do you really think I can do it? Alexander leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. I don't just think, I know. The certainty in his words shattered the invisible chains that had bound her for so long. In her heart, the fire of ambition burned fiercer than ever. Alexander's words, I know, echoed in Emily's mind. So powerful it felt like the entire world had paused. The mocking laughter and scornful eyes all faded into meaningless background noise. He sat up straighter, his tone more serious now. Placing both hands on the table, he fixed his gaze on her. Emily, let me ask you something. If you had the chance to present this idea seriously, would you dare to take it? The question stunned her, and the entire diner. A few people nearly dropped their cutlery. The men who mocked her sat wide-eyed, unable to believe what they had just heard. Emily swallowed hard. Her throat was tight, but her eyes shone with a determination she had never revealed so clearly before. I would. I've dreamed of this for too long. Alexander nodded, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his lips. He pulled out a business card and placed it on her worn notebook. This is my direct number. Tomorrow night, I'll be at a networking event with several investors. I want you there. Bring your business plan. I'll introduce you to the people who need to hear it. The diner erupted in hushed commotion. What? Did he really invite her? No way. A waitress at an elite event? Emily's hands trembled as she took the card, her palm burning as if she were holding lightning itself. Fear and exhilaration surged through her chest. This could be the only chance of her life. Alexander rose, straightening his suit. Before leaving, he looked at her one last time and said, Remember, this dream isn't just yours anymore. It deserves to be shared. The diner bell jingled as he walked out. Emily stood frozen, the card clutched in her hand, staring into a future she had never dared to imagine, now opening wide before her. The next day, Emily barely slept. All night she tossed and turned, staring at the tiny business card on her table. Questions spun through her mind. Should I really go? What if they laugh at me? What if he was joking? In the morning at the diner, her co-workers noticed the dark circles under her eyes and sneered. Look at her. Probably spent the whole night dreaming she's a billionaire now. Laughter erupted again, but for the first time Emily smiled and felt their mockery had lost its sting. She spent the day thinking, preparing. Her biggest problem, she had nothing to wear. Emily's closet was filled with cheap dresses bought on clearance. How could a poor waitress show up among ladies and gentlemen draped in luxury brands? That evening, she dug through her wardrobe and found a simple black dress she had bought years ago during a huge sale. It wasn't glamorous, but it fit. She twirled in front of the mirror, then chuckled at the only pair of high heels she owned, cracked at the back. Well, at least they'll make me a little taller, she muttered to herself. Emily then spent hours rewriting her business plan into a cleaner presentation, though only on plain paper. She had no laptop, no PowerPoint, but she had belief. Every word, every figure she wrote with her heart, hoping someone would truly listen. As night fell, Emily sat at her small mirror in her rented room, applying a faint red lipstick, the only one she had kept since her 20th birthday. Looking at her reflection, she whispered, Emily, this isn't just a dream anymore. This is an opportunity, and you won't let it slip away. Her heart raced, torn between fear and excitement. For the first time in her life, Emily was preparing to step into a world she had only ever seen on television. The taxi stopped in front of one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Emily looked up at the towering building, its countless glass windows glowing golden in the night. Even the red carpet rolled out at the entrance made her legs feel heavier. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised to see a young woman in a simple black dress stepping out among gleaming luxury cars. You sure this is the right place? He asked. Emily swallowed hard and forced a smile. Yes, the right place. Outside, guests arrived in glamorous gowns and tailored tuxedos. They walked with confidence, laughing loudly as if the world itself belonged to them. Emily took a deep breath and told herself, I have the right to be here, even if just for one night. She entered the lobby. Crystal chandeliers bathed the marble floors in dazzling light. A piano played softly in the corner, blending with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Every step she took felt heavy. Every glance seemed to land on her. A few women raised their brows and whispered. A man in a tuxedo chuckled mockingly. Look, must have taken a wrong turn from the staff entrance. Laughter rippled quietly, and Emily's cheeks burned. But then a familiar voice cut through the air. Emily! Alexander emerged from the crowd, tall, confident, his face bright with a welcoming smile. He walked straight to her, extending his hand as if she were an honored guest. I'm glad you came, he said warmly. The gesture made the surrounding crowd pause. A famous CEO was publicly welcoming, a girl none of them had ever seen. Emily placed her trembling hand in his, half her fear melting away. Alexander bowed his head slightly and guided her toward the grand hall. Tonight, Emily, he said softly, you're not just a waitress anymore. Alexander led Emily into the grand hall. The space was so magnificent it felt like stepping into another world. Art paintings on the walls, tables draped in spotless white cloths, golden lights casting a warm glow across the vast room. Heads turned as Alexander walked in. He was always the center of attention, but tonight all eyes also fell on the young woman at his side, the one in a plain black dress. Who is she? She doesn't look like high society at all. Could she be of his new girlfriend? Emily heard it all, her face burning, but Alexander remained calm. He stopped before a group of middle-aged men in sharp suits, well-known investors in the industry. Allow me to introduce, Alexander said, his voice steady and commanding. This is Emily. She has an idea I believe you should hear. The air stilled for a beat. Skeptical eyes swept over Emily, sizing her up. One man raised a brow, smirking. An idea? From a waitress? The words cut deep. Emily bit her lip, clutching her notebook tightly. For a moment she almost turned and walked away. But Alexander placed a firm hand on her shoulder. A silent reminder. Believe in yourself. Emily took a deep breath, summoning all her courage. She smiled, her eyes filled with resolve. Yes, I'm a waitress, but that doesn't mean I can't dream big. And my dream is written in this notebook. The group fell silent. Some eyes shifted from disdain to curiosity. No one had expected such confident words from someone so ordinary. Alexander looked at Emily, nodding in quiet approval. He knew this was the moment where the real test began. Emily stood in the circle of sharp gazes. Her hands trembled, but her voice grew steadier as she opened her notebook. My idea begins with the very place I work every day. A small diner where people come only to fill their stomachs, but leave feeling empty. I believe a restaurant shouldn't just serve food. It should serve respect, connection, and an experience that makes people want to return. The room fell silent. The earlier whispers faded away. Emily went on, her eyes glowing with fire. I've studied customer habits, drafted cost projections, and even outlined a model for expansion into a chain. Not just to make money, but to build a brand people can be proud to enter. A place where workers, office clerks, or even a CEO are treated the same. Some investors frowned in surprise, realizing the plan wasn't as shallow as they expected. Alexander crossed his arms, smiling with satisfaction, his eyes gleaming as if he had foreseen this. But then, a cold, mocking voice rang out from the back of the room. Sounds nice, but it's all theory. Where does a poor waitress get capital? Management skills? And who would trust someone with nothing but a tray in her hand? A few chuckles followed. The air tightened again like invisible knives pointed at Emily. She took a deep breath, closed her notebook, gripped it tightly, and lifted her chin. You're right. I don't have capital. I don't have a degree. But I have something money can't buy. Belief. And if no one gives me an opportunity, I'll create it myself. I've lived my whole life being underestimated, so I have nothing left to lose. The only thing I have is the drive to turn this dream into reality. The room went silent. Some heads nodded slightly. A woman set down her wine glass, her eyes shimmering with emotion. Alexander broke the silence with firm applause. The sound echoed through the hall, followed by scattered claps, then slowly, the entire room joined in. Emily stood there, eyes glistening, her heart full of something she had never felt before. She didn't know if she would succeed, but for the first time, her dream had a voice before the world. The applause slowly faded, but its echo still lingered in the hall. Emily stood there, heart pounding, clutching her notebook as if it were the only shield she had in this sea of powerful people. An older investor with silver hair and a stern face stepped forward. His eyes were sharp as knives as he stared at her. "Young lady, I admit you have courage. But in business, courage alone isn't enough. If I invest in you, how can you guarantee I won't lose all my money?" The tension in the room rose again. Some nodded in agreement. Others waited to see Emily falter. She took a deep breath, steadying her voice. "Sir, I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I promise I'll learn faster than anyone else. I've lived in a world where even the smallest mistake costs me my job and dignity. That's why I understand the value of responsibility. If you trust me, I won't just treat your money as an investment. I'll treat it as my own life." The hall buzzed with whispers. Some looked surprised, while Alexander smiled proudly. At that moment, another voice cut through the air, a woman in a striking red dress. She sipped her wine, her gaze sharp. "You speak well, but business isn't just ideas and passion. Do you have a concrete plan for expansion? Or is this just a romantic dream on paper?" Emily gripped her notebook, her eyes gleaming. This was the moment to prove her plan wasn't just words. She flipped to a page with a hand-drawn diagram of a restaurant chain, lifted her head, and spoke firmly. "I have a plan, and I will prove to all of you that this dream isn't just mine. It can be a real opportunity for anyone bold enough to invest." The room fell silent again. But this time it wasn't cheap skepticism, it was anticipation. Emily had stepped into the real game. Emily took a deep breath, opened her notebook, and turned it toward the investors watching closely. "This is the preliminary design for the restaurant chain I envision," she said, her voice firmer than ever. "I call it Hearth and Home because I want every customer to feel as if they're coming home." She pointed to a hand-drawn layout showing an open service counter, a semi-open kitchen so customers could watch the cooking, and seating divided into 3 levels: affordable for workers, practical for office staff, and refined enough to attract business professionals. "The difference," Emily continued, "is that the pricing will be flexible, so a worker can enjoy a decent meal, but the service will still be polished enough to make a businessman return." Murmurs rippled through the room. A young investor nodded subtly, clearly impressed by her segmentation. Emily flipped to the next page, where she had meticulously calculated costs. "Here's the estimated startup capital for the first location. I've researched rental prices, staffing, and food supplies. I know I don't have much, but starting small, I can prove profitability within the first year." Another investor, who had been frowning at first, now leaned in with interest. The woman in the red dress no longer smirked. Her eyes were now fixed on Emily's notes. Emily pressed on, her voice growing stronger. "And most importantly, I want to build a brand that doesn't just sell food. I want a place where everyone, no matter their social status, feels welcome. Because I've seen too much contempt in this world and I want to change that." The hall fell silent once more. This time it wasn't derision in the air. It was curiosity, perhaps even admiration not yet spoken aloud. Alexander watched her, his eyes shining as if witnessing a seed suddenly grow tall in the desert. He smiled faintly and murmured, just loud enough for a few nearby to hear, "She truly has what it takes." After Emily closed her notebook, the hall held its breath. But the silence didn't last. An investor with salt-and-pepper hair and gold-rimmed glasses leaned forward. "Your idea's interesting," he said slowly, "but the restaurant market is brutal. How do you plan to compete with chains that already have brand recognition and million-dollar advertising budgets?" Emily froze for a moment. The question struck hard, but she inhaled deeply and replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "You're right. I don't have millions to spend on ads, but I have something big corporations often lose: closeness. I'll start from the small community, from familiar customers. When a worker feels respected in my restaurant, he'll tell his coworkers. When an office employee finds a welcoming lunch spot, she'll come back with friends. Word of mouth is the strongest advertisement, and that's where I'll begin." A few nods appeared among the crowd, but another investor cut in sharply. What about staffing? You've never managed anyone. What makes you think you can run an entire team? Emily clenched her hands, palms damp with sweat. She remembered the years she spent serving, enduring contempt while still keeping a smile so no one left unhappy. She lifted her gaze, her eyes blazing. Because I've learned to manage the hardest things, arrogance and disdain. If I can survive shifts filled with difficult customers and mocking coworkers, I believe I can lead a team with respect. And once employees feel valued, they'll stay and give their best. The hall fell silent again. This time, the woman in the red dress gave a faint smile, her gaze no longer dismissive, but intrigued. Alexander, standing quietly nearby with his hands in his pockets, didn't say a word, but the proud curve of his lips showed he knew Emily had just scored more points than she realized. The hall was silent, as if everyone was waiting to see what more Emily could say. She stood there, sweat beading on her forehead, but her eyes still shining. It felt as if she had just survived a storm, and realized this was only the beginning. Suddenly, the silver-haired investor with gold-rimmed glasses, the one who had asked her the first tough question, stood up straight. He set his wine glass down and said clearly, "Young lady, you've surprised me. I'd like to meet with you privately after this event. Perhaps we should talk more seriously." Whispers erupted across the room. Some looked at each other in shock. A few faces tightened, as if they had just missed out on something valuable. Emily froze. She could hardly believe what she had just heard. Her heart pounded. Her ears rang. She managed to reply, her voice trembling yet full of emotion. "Thank you, sir. It would be an honor." Alexander smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming with pride, like a mentor watching his student come into her own. He gently placed a hand on Emily's back and whispered, "I told you. You have more than you think." Around them, the crowd's attitude began to shift. Those who had snickered earlier now looked at Emily differently, not with scorn, but with curiosity, even respect. Emily clutched her notebook tightly. In that moment, she knew. This was no longer just a dream on paper. It had truly begun to turn into reality. The applause slowly faded, but its echo still lingered in the hall. Emily stood there, heart pounding, clutching her notebook as if it were the only shield she had in this sea of powerful people. An older investor with silver hair and a stern face stepped forward. His eyes were sharp as knives as he stared at her. "Young lady, I admit you have courage. But in business, courage alone isn't enough. If I invest in you, how can you guarantee I won't lose all my money?" The tension in the room rose again. Some nodded in agreement. Others waited to see Emily falter. She took a deep breath, steadying her voice. "Sir, I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I promise I'll learn faster than anyone else. I've lived in a world where even the smallest mistake costs me my job and dignity. That's why I understand the value of responsibility. If you trust me, I won't just treat your money as an investment. I'll treat it as my own life." The hall buzzed with whispers. Some looked surprised, while Alexander smiled proudly. At that moment, another voice cut through the air, a woman in a striking red dress. She sipped her wine, her gaze sharp. "You speak well, but business isn't just ideas and passion. Do you have a concrete plan for expansion? Or is this just a romantic dream on paper?" Emily gripped her notebook, her eyes gleaming. This was the moment to prove her plan wasn't just words. She flipped to a page with a hand-drawn diagram of a restaurant chain, lifted her head, and spoke firmly. "I have a plan, and I will prove to all of you that this dream isn't just mine. It can be a real opportunity for anyone bold enough to invest." The room fell silent again. But this time it wasn't cheap skepticism, it was anticipation. Emily had stepped into the real game. Emily took a deep breath, opened her notebook, and turned it toward the investors watching closely. "This is the preliminary design for the restaurant chain I envision," she said, her voice firmer than ever. "I call it Hearth and Home, because I want every customer to feel as if they're coming home." She pointed to a hand-drawn layout showing an open service counter, a semi-open kitchen so customers could watch the cooking, and seating divided into 3 levels: affordable for workers, practical for office staff, and refined enough to attract business professionals. "The difference," Emily continued, "is that the pricing will be flexible, so a worker can enjoy a decent meal, but the service will still be polished enough to make a businessman return." Murmurs rippled through the room. A young investor nodded subtly, clearly impressed by her segmentation. Emily flipped to the next page, where she had meticulously calculated costs. Here's the estimated startup capital for the first location. I've researched rental prices, staffing, and food supplies. I know I don't have much, but starting small, I can prove profitability within the first year. Another investor, who had been frowning at first, now leaned in with interest. The woman in the red dress no longer smirked. Her eyes were now fixed on Emily's notes. Emily pressed on, her voice growing stronger. And most importantly, I want to build a brand that doesn't just sell food. I want a place where everyone, no matter their social status, feels welcome. Because I've seen too much contempt in this world and I want to change that. The hall fell silent once more. This time it wasn't derision in the air. It was curiosity, perhaps even admiration not yet spoken aloud. Alexander watched her, his eyes shining as if witnessing a seed suddenly grow tall in the desert. He smiled faintly and murmured, just loud enough for a few nearby to hear, "She truly has what it takes." After Emily closed her notebook, the hall held its breath. But the silence didn't last. An investor with salt and pepper hair and gold-rimmed glasses leaned forward. "Your idea's interesting," he said slowly, "but the restaurant market is brutal. How do you plan to compete with chains that already have brand recognition and million-dollar advertising budgets?" Emily froze for a moment. The question struck hard, but she inhaled deeply and replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "You're right. I don't have millions to spend on ads, but I have something big corporations often lose: closeness. I'll start from the small community, from familiar customers. When a worker feels respected in my restaurant, he'll tell his coworkers. When an office employee finds a welcoming lunch spot, she'll come back with friends. Word of mouth is the strongest advertisement, and that's where I'll begin." A few nods appeared among the crowd, but another investor cut in sharply. "What about staffing? You've never managed anyone. What makes you think you can run an entire team?" Emily clenched her hands, palms damp with sweat. She remembered the years she spent serving, enduring contempt while still keeping a smile so no one left unhappy. She lifted her gaze, her eyes blazing. "Because I've learned to manage the hardest things: arrogance and disdain. If I can survive shifts filled with difficult customers and mocking coworkers, I believe I can lead a team with respect. And once employees feel valued, they'll stay and give their best." The hall fell silent again. This time, the woman in the red dress gave a faint smile, her gaze no longer dismissive, but intrigued. Alexander, standing quietly nearby with his hands in his pockets, didn't say a word. But the proud curve of his lips showed he knew Emily had just scored more points than she realized. The hall was silent, as if everyone was waiting to see what more Emily could say. She stood there, sweat beading on her forehead, but her eyes still shining. It felt as if she had just survived a storm, and realized this was only the beginning. Suddenly, the silver-haired investor with gold-rimmed glasses, the one who had asked her the first tough question, stood up straight. He set his wineglass down and said clearly, "Young lady, you've surprised me. I'd like to meet with you privately after this event. Perhaps we should talk more seriously." Whispers erupted across the room. Some looked at each other in shock. A few faces tightened, as if they had just missed out on something valuable. Emily froze. She could hardly believe what she had just heard. Her heart pounded, her ears rang. She managed to reply, her voice trembling yet full of emotion. "Thank you, sir. It would be an honor." Alexander smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming with pride, like a mentor watching his student come into her own. He gently placed a hand on Emily's back and whispered, "I told you. You have more than you think." Around them, the crowd's attitude began to shift. Those who had snickered earlier now looked at Emily differently, not with scorn, but with curiosity, even respect. Emily clutched her notebook tightly. In that moment, she knew. This was no longer just a dream on paper. It had truly begun to turn into reality. Henderson leaned his elbows on the desk, fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on Emily with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "All right, Emily," he said, his gravelly voice echoing. "You claim you have a plan. Then show me why I should hand over my prime property to a waitress with no deposit." Emily inhaled deeply, opened her notebook, and spread out the papers she had prepared. Her hands trembled slightly, but soon steadied. "Here's the customer analysis for the area around your building," she began, her voice clear. Within a 1-mile radius, there are over 12,000 office workers, but only 2 mid-range restaurants. Both are consistently overcrowded at lunch. If I open a restaurant here, I can meet that unmet demand. Henderson raised his brows, picked up a sheet, glanced at it, then dropped it back on the desk. You've got numbers, but numbers don't cook meals. Who's running the kitchen? Who's serving customers? You don't even have a team. Emily faltered for a second, then lifted her chin. I'll start with what I know. I've served customers for years. I know what they want and what they hate. I have colleagues who dream of doing more than carrying trays. If you give me the chance, I'll persuade them to join me. I can't promise a perfect team right away, but I promise a loyal one. Henderson scoffed, crossing his arms and leaning back. Touching. But loyalty doesn't pay rent. How will you guarantee I get my money every month? Emily drew a breath and pointed to a chart in her notebook. This is my cost and profit projection. I calculated that with just 60% table capacity at lunchtime, the restaurant can cover rent. And I don't intend to stop at 60%. I plan to attract regulars through membership perks, partnerships with nearby offices, and hosting small events right in the restaurant. Henderson stayed silent. His eyes no longer dismissed her, they weighed her words. But then he leaned forward, his voice dropping. Your pitch almost convinces me, but I'm still missing the most important thing. What makes me believe you won't walk away halfway through, like dozens of others who signed contracts here and disappeared? Emily's fists clenched, her heart pounding like a drum. She knew this was the pivotal question, and her answer would decide everything. Emily stood still for a moment. Her heart pounded, but her eyes grew brighter, unyielding and resolute. Mr. Henderson, she began, her voice no longer trembling. I don't have a glamorous resume to show you. I don't have a list of powerful investors backing me, but I have something none of the people who walked away from here ever had. I'm used to being trapped in hardship, and I've never run from it. She drew a deep breath, her voice breaking slightly but carrying strength. I grew up in a poor neighborhood where I saw people give up every day, give up school, jobs, families, but I didn't. I've been a waitress for 8 years, enduring customers' contempt and coworkers' mockery. If I were the type to quit, I would have quit on day one. Emily stepped closer to his desk, laying her hand on the notebook. What I'm offering you isn't just a business plan. I'm offering myself, a person who will stay until the end, because I have no way back. I'll stay, I'll fight, and I'll pay every month's rent, until this restaurant becomes the pride of your building. Henderson sat silently, staring at her. His once cold gaze flickered, unsettled. A long moment passed, the only sound the ticking of the clock. Finally, Henderson exhaled sharply, half scoff, half reluctant acknowledgement. Girl, you're not like the others who've sat here. A glimmer of interest flashed in his eyes. He hadn't agreed yet, but Emily knew she had struck exactly what he wanted to see: resilience, conviction, and an unbreakable will. Henderson sat silently for a few seconds, then suddenly rose from his chair. He walked to the window, arms crossed, staring down at the stream of traffic below. His voice echoed through the spacious office. You speak well, but words are easy. I need to see you do something crazy enough to make me believe you're ready to play a big game. Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding. What? What do you want me to do? Henderson turned, his eyes sharp as blades. There's a ground floor space right under this building. It's been empty for nearly a year, too expensive, too risky. Tomorrow, I want you back here with a list of at least 10 potential customers, people you personally convinced. If you can do that, I'll consider signing. If not, he shrugged casually.
This conversation ends here. Emily froze.
10 potential customers in less than 24 hours? She had no company, no brand, not even a restaurant yet. The thought was like a mountain rising before her. But Henderson wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his voice low and gravelly. And remember, I don't want empty promises. I want names, phone numbers, and written agreement on paper. If you dare to step into business, prove you can make people bet on you, not on money. Emily's hands trembled, but deep in her eyes, a spark flickered. She thought of Richard, of Alexander, of all the years she had been underestimated. If this was the final test to prove her worth, she would fight it to the end. She lifted her chin and replied firmly, All right. Tomorrow I'll return with 10 names. You won't have to wait long. Henderson laughed, his voice booming through the room. But this time, there was a hint of surprise, perhaps even excitement.
Girl, I don't know if you're insane or brave.
But fine, I'll be waiting. The office door closed behind her, and Emily stood frozen in the wide hallway. Her heart pounded, Henderson's cold words echoing in her ears. 10 potential customers. Names, phone numbers, signatures. Tomorrow. She took a deep breath, but the fear constricting her chest wouldn't fade. How could a waitress with no company, no brand, convince 10 strangers to sign an agreement in just one day? As Emily descended into the lobby, her worn heels clattered against the marble floor. Outside, the city bustled, everyone busy, no one caring about a girl clutching a battered notebook. For a moment, she felt impossibly small. Part of her wanted to give up, return to the diner, keep carrying trays as if nothing had ever happened. But then memories surged. Alexander's confident gaze, Richard's steady voice, and the mocking laughter of the diner regulars. If she quit now, all she had endured, all the humiliation, would mean nothing. Biting her lip, Emily stepped into the afternoon sun. She opened her notebook to the line she had written at 3 a.m. Trust doesn't live in contracts. Trust begins with people. She nodded to herself. If Henderson wanted proof, she would find it. Without hesitation, Emily began her quest. She knocked on doors of small neighborhood shops, a laundromat, an old bookstore, a corner cafe, even an auto repair garage. She introduced herself, showed her sketches, and spoke with all the sincerity she had. I'm about to open a new restaurant, a place where everyone is welcome, like home. I'd like to invite you to become my very first customers. If you believe in me, please leave your name and signature. I promise to make it a place you'll be proud to return to. At first, most declined. Some looked at her like a delusional dreamer. One even pushed the paper back, scoffing. Emily walked away, heavy-hearted. But she didn't stop. At the 5th stop, a gray-haired laundromat owner quietly picked up the pen and signed. You remind me of myself when I was young, she said, her eyes warm. I don't know if you'll succeed, but I believe you'll give it everything you've got. Emily clutched that first signed page, her heart soaring. Just 9 more names to go. She lifted her head to the crowded street, her eyes blazing. The hard journey had only begun, but this time Emily knew she wouldn't stop. By late afternoon, Emily was still trudging along the crowded streets, her worn-out heels burning her feet. In her hand, the list of potential customers carried only a single signature. The 6th stop was a small cafe. Emily smiled, introduced herself, and shared her idea. The owner, a young man with slicked-back hair, smirked as he listened. You want to open a restaurant near me? Then good luck, because I won't sign something that digs my own grave. Emily bit her lip, bowed politely, and left. She didn't blame him, competition was natural, but every rejection cut into her fragile confidence. The 7th, 8th, 9th shops, most shook their heads. Some didn't even bother letting her finish. Sorry, I'm busy. Not interested? A waitress opening a restaurant? Ridiculous. Sweat streamed down her face, mixing with tears she struggled to hold back. Each refusal echoed Henderson's demand. I want names, phone numbers, and signatures. Tomorrow. The deadline weighed on her like a boulder. At dusk, Emily stepped into an old, dusty bookstore with hardly any customers. The elderly owner looked up over her reading glasses, suspicion in her eyes. But Emily didn't give up. She opened her notebook, presented her plan with every ounce of passion she had left, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but burning with conviction. The woman sat silently for a long while, then slowly picked up the pen and signed.
Dear, some dreams are worth chasing, even when they seem the craziest.
I don't know if you'll succeed, but I want to see you try. Emily's hands trembled as she accepted the paper, her eyes brimming. She now had her second signature. The night settled in, streetlights glowing, but Emily pressed on. She knew she couldn't stop when she had only completed 1/10 of the journey. In her heart, the familiar words rang again. Trust begins with people. Night fell, the city glowing with neon lights. The crowd bustled on, but Emily walked slowly, her feet aching as if each step was on fire. In her hand, the list bore only 2 names, far too few compared to 10. She stepped into a corner auto repair shop. The bearded owner wiped his greasy hands as Emily presented her pitch. He burst out laughing. You want me to sign a promise to eat at a restaurant that doesn't exist? That's hilarious. I'd sooner bet on the worst team in the league. Biting her lip, Emily thanked him and walked away. Every rejection weighed heavy on her chest, but her feet kept moving. Around 9 p.m., she stumbled upon a group of office workers outside a bar after work. Summoning all her courage, Emily approached and shared her idea. At first, they looked at her with skeptical curiosity. But then a young woman smiled. "Sounds good. If you really open near my office, I'll bring my whole team for lunch." "Fine, I'll sign. One more signature." Then 2 of her friends signed as well. Emily nearly broke down crying right there on the sidewalk. From 3 signatures, she now had 5, halfway. Hope flickered alive, but the clock read nearly 10. Shops were closing. Exhaustion pressed down hard. Her legs shook, her throat parched, her stomach hollow after a day with nothing but water. She sat on the steps of a building, staring at the sheet with 5 trembling signatures. The night wind chilled her, blurring her eyes with tears. For a moment she whispered, "Maybe I can't," but then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Emily, I'm the bookstore owner. I told some friends about your story. They want to meet you tomorrow morning to sign." Emily gasped, her heart racing, her eyes lighting up again. Her tears now shimmered with hope, not despair. She stood, clutching the paper tight, whispering, "No, I will do this." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tiny window of Emily's room, waking her after only a few hours of restless sleep. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but they shone brighter than ever. In her hand was the paper with 5 signatures, but today it would hold more. She hurried to the old bookstore. The owner stood waiting at the door, a warm smile on her wrinkled face. Beside her were 3 friends, each running small shops in the neighborhood. "This is the young woman I told you about last night," the owner introduced. "She has a dream, and I believe it's one worth trusting." Emily, her voice thick with emotion, thanked them before presenting her plan again. This time more confidently, no longer just as a waitress, but as someone planting seeds of belief. The first, an owner of a tiny grocery, signed quietly. The second, an elderly tailor, nodded and put pen to paper. The third, a florist, smiled. "We want to see you succeed. And who knows, maybe your restaurant will bring customers who stop by to buy flowers from me too." Emily's hands trembled as she held the 3 new signatures, her heart overflowing. Now she had 8 names. Only 2 more to go. But the bookstore owner wasn't finished. She added, "One more thing. I called my book club. We're meeting at noon today, more than a dozen of us. If you come, perhaps you'll walk away with even more signatures." Emily could hardly believe her ears. The opportunity had arrived just when she needed it most. She nodded firmly, her eyes shimmering. "Thank you. I'll be there, and I won't let anyone down." That noon, Emily arrived at a small cafe where the bookstore owner's reading group gathered. The place was packed, mostly with older faces, some still holding half-finished novels in their hands. At first, Emily felt out of place. A young woman in plain clothes clutching her worn notebook, standing before a dozen curious eyes. The bookstore owner smiled, clapped gently, and introduced her. "This is Emily. She has a dream, and I think we should hear it." All eyes turned to Emily. For a moment she wanted to run, but then she remembered Henderson and her own promise. "Tomorrow I'll return with 10 names." She drew a deep breath, stepped forward. She opened her notebook, then closed it again. Instead of numbers, she chose to speak from her heart. "Hello, everyone. My name is Emily. I've been a waitress for 8 years, and in those years I've heard thousands of stories from customers, but rarely has anyone wanted to hear mine. Today, I'd like to share a small dream of mine." Her voice trembled at first, then grew steady. She spoke of a restaurant where anyone could feel welcome, whether in a polished suit or dusty work clothes. A place where laborers could lift their heads proudly when ordering, and the elderly could find a peaceful corner. The cafe grew quiet. The skeptical eyes softened, some nodded, some smiled. When Emily finished, the room broke into warm applause. An elderly man with silver hair and a cane stepped up to sign. Then, one by one, the rest followed. Emily watched the stack of papers grow thicker before her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Not just 10. She had more than 10 signatures now. The bookstore owner squeezed her hand gently, whispering, "See? When you speak from the heart, people will listen." Emily nodded, clutching her notebook. For the first time, Henderson's challenge no longer felt like an impossible mountain, but like a real path unfolding before her. The next morning, Emily walked into Henderson's building, her steps unsteady but her eyes shining. In her hands was a stack of papers, more than yesterday, not just 10 signatures, but more. The receptionist recognized her, surprised, then quickly called upstairs. Minutes later, Emily stood again before the heavy wooden office door. "Come in," Henderson's voice boomed from inside. Emily pushed the door open. Henderson sat behind his desk, coffee in hand, his eyes half mocking, half expectant. "Well, the bold girl returns. I suppose you're here to apologize for failing, aren't you?" Emily clutched her notebook, drew a deep breath, and set the stack of papers on his desk. "No, sir. I'm here to show you my list of potential customers." Henderson raised a brow, leaning in. He flipped through the first page. Names, phone numbers, signatures. Then the second, the third. His expression shifted slightly. "These all real?" he asked, his voice lower now. Emily nodded. "I went door to door, shops, cafes, even a book club in the neighborhood. They signed not because I paid them, not because I made empty promises. They signed because they believe in me." The room fell silent. Henderson leaned back, staring at Emily as though weighing a rare gem he had never seen before. Finally, the corner of his mouth curved into an unreadable smile. "Girl, you've managed to intrigue me. Perhaps it's time we discuss something more serious." Emily's heart pounded wildly. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment her impossible dream began to brush against reality. Henderson leaned back, watching Emily with a gaze both curious and calculating. He tapped his fingers on the desk, each beat slow yet heavy with tension. "Girl, I'll admit," he said slowly, "I didn't expect you to return, let alone bring a dozen signatures. But—" He paused, narrowing his eyes. "A list of signatures is still just ink on paper. I want to know if you can turn that trust into real money." Emily gripped her notebook, her heart pounding. "What do you want me to do?" Henderson rose and walked to the window, pointing down at the busy street below. "This weekend there's a community fair in the plaza outside. I'll give you a booth, but no other support. No money, no advertising. If you can turn that booth into the busiest spot at the fair and secure at least 50 pre-orders for your future restaurant, I'll sign the lease." Emily's mouth dropped open. "A booth at the fair? In just 2 days? It sounded insane. You're serious?" Henderson turned, his eyes sharp but gleaming with interest. "I never joke in business. This is your only shot. Do it, and you'll have your restaurant. Fail," he shrugged. "You'll just be another dream fading away." Emily drew a deep breath, her chest tight. Part of her wanted to cry out that the challenge was unfair. But another part, stronger, whispered, "This is the real chance." She lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. "I'll do it. You'll have 50 pre-orders or more." Henderson stared at her for a few moments, then chuckled darkly. "Good. I'll be waiting to see how a waitress can stir up an entire fair." Emily left the office on shaky legs, but inside her heart a new fire roared. This challenge could drown her, or make her a legend. Emily left Henderson's building, her steps trembling. She knew this challenge was even tougher than collecting signatures. A booth at the fair, no money, no advertising, and only 2 days to prepare. If she failed, everything would end. That night, in her tiny apartment, Emily spread her notebook open and filled the pages with ideas. She asked herself, how can a small booth stand out among dozens of others? She remembered her years as a waitress. A genuine smile always brought customers back, and a warm greeting could brighten someone's entire day. Then she realized what she had wasn't money or technology, but human connection. Emily decided to transform her booth into a mini restaurant. No fancy decor, just a few wooden tables borrowed from the bookstore, flower arrangements from the florist who had signed her petition, and old tablecloths the tailor offered to provide. She came up with a bold idea: cook sample dishes right there at the booth. But she had no stove. After several phone calls, she convinced the cafe owner to lend her an old electric cooktop. A former co-worker, once an assistant chef, agreed to help her cook for free. All night, Emily ran around the neighborhood gathering every small thing. The florist donated leftover vases, the laundromat lent her an iron to press the tablecloths, and the book club members volunteered to help decorate the booth. As the pieces came together, Emily looked at the pile of old mismatched items, yet full of love and trust, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She knew the upcoming fair was no longer just her test, but the hope of an entire community placing their faith in her. The day of the fair arrived. The plaza outside Henderson's building buzzed with color. Clothing stalls draped with fabrics, food booths sizzling with aromas, game stands echoing with children's laughter. Amid the lively chaos, Emily's booth looked humble. Just a few wooden tables, old tablecloths, small vases of flowers, and a battered electric cooktop. At first, no one paid attention. People walked by, glanced, and shook their heads. A restaurant? Looks more like a yard sale booth. Some vendors nearby chuckled, whispering, "She thinks she can compete with the sizzling barbecue next door?" Emily heard every word, her heart aching. But she swallowed her tears, forced a smile, and began. She and her former co-worker cooked a simple vegetable soup, its aroma drifting gently through the air. An elderly woman stopped, sniffed curiously, and smiled warmly. "Give me a bowl." Emily's hands trembled as she served it, bowing in thanks. The woman tasted a spoonful, her eyes lighting up. "Delicious!" Truly comforting. That small compliment was like sunlight piercing clouds. Passers-by began to notice. A young couple stopped, then a group of students. With every bowl Emily served, she handed out a pre-order form. "When the restaurant opens, I'll be back." To her surprise, they signed. Signature by signature, smile by smile. The little booth grew crowded. People came not only for the food, but for the sincerity radiating from Emily as she said, "My restaurant will be your home. I want you to be my very first guests." Within hours, her list of pre-orders thickened quickly. Above, Henderson stood on the balcony, watching. His eyes no longer mocked. He said nothing, but the faint curl of his lips revealed he had just witnessed something he never expected.